very warm welcome then, first to our distinguished speakers and to all of our participants on behalf of ICLEI. So we're thrilled today to help and host this very important conversation about how cities can become green harbors of hope by integrating their work on migration and sustainability. ICLEI, for those of you who don't yet know it, is a global network of local and regional governments dedicated to sustainable urban development. We have over 2,500 members worldwide, and we've been supporting cities to embrace ambitious sustainability action since the early 1990s. This webinar is part of the Road to Malmö series, which leads up to ICLEI's World Congress in Malmö, taking place on the 11th to 13th of May, so very soon, and there are still a few seats left if you feel like joining us and hundreds of city leaders from all around the world. My co-facilitator, Yu Yi, and myself work for ICLEI's European Secretariat, where we focus on integrating sustainability and justice. This is a topic of critical importance. As the scope and speed of transitions is growing, so does the risk of exacerbating inequalities and putting in place new patterns of exclusion. At the same time, we're seeing increasing pressures on cities from migration, whether due to worsening climate issues, war, or instability, not least of which in Ukraine right now. Local governments, together with civil society and other local actors, have a key role to play in addressing these challenges. So today's webinar is exploring how cities can become sustainable and resilient places that are both fair and inclusive. In today's webinar, we're going to start after a quick poll by a keynote address from Mr. Sedat Arif, Malmö's Deputy Mayor, responsible for the labor market and social services. And then afterwards, we'll have some brief contributions from Lena Wetterskog of the Skåne, I hope I say it correctly, Skåne Stadsmission, and Joanna Balzema from the city of Cascais. Afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion and some time for a Q&A with the audience, and then we'll close with a few final reflections. So before going into the thick of the webinar, I'll pass over to my colleague Yu Yi to take us through a couple quick polls to get to know you.
Thank you, Matthew, and welcome all on my behalf too. So once again, my name is Yu Huan, and I am Just Transition Officer at ICLEI Europe as well. And I'm very happy to be here co-facilitating this webinar with Matthew, and I also look forward for the discussion with all our great speakers. So since this is a webinar, we are very much aware that it is sometimes hard to get to know you, the audience behind the screen, which is why I have prepared two easy polls for us and you to understand who else is in the room today. So first, I want to know what type of actor you are. You should be now seeing the first questions where you can choose one answer that describes your current professional background the best. And there can be also some interested citizens among us who aren't here for work reasons. So maybe you can choose that option. There is an option for you too. So just please choose the one that describes you the best so we can see a little bit of the distribution. Okay, I'm now seeing answers coming in. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer. And seems like we have quite like a diverse distribution. We have some people from research and education, some from private sector and business, some from national government, some from international organization, and an interested citizen as well. Thank you. This is good for us to know a little bit of the diversity of the participants. So we cannot go too much jargon here, let's say so. I can maybe move on to the next poll question, which is what is your level of expertise in migrant inclusion and or sustainable cities? So you should see now the new questions in the poll, and you can again choose one answer. So let us know whether you're new to these topics or if you're already an expert on one or of these topics or both of them. So an expert here means that you can connect both migrant inclusion and sustainability together in your work and activities. And this is very much the goal of our webinar. Okay, there are some, the answers are coming in. And so far, it seems that we have very much expert level people or competent level expert here. So people who have worked one of these topics but have not connected these two. And this is very much our intent to try to bridge these two topics together. So very nice to have expertise on these topics present, and we try our best to bridge these two topics then during our webinar. But then there are also people who are not familiar with these topics so much or are interested in these topics but haven't actively worked with these. So we are trying to keep this webinar then clear in language for you too. Okay, thank you for taking part in this short warm-up exercise and letting us to know you a little bit here. And then I could pass it back to Matthew. Would you want to continue from here?
Great, thank you very much, Yui, and it's very good to see that we have a diverse group with us. And please also don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat during, so in the Q&A function during the speaker's interventions. We'll come to them at the end of the webinar. Okay, then without further ado, then I want to introduce then Mr. Sadat Arif, Malmö's Deputy Mayor, who's responsible then for the labor market and social services. He's been in this role since early 2017, and he previously worked as an ombudsman responsible for organizing members within the Social Democratic Party in Malmö, and as a union recruiter and educator in a trade union. During the refugee crisis in 2015, Mr. Arif was also deeply involved in fundraising initiatives for refugees. So we look forward to hearing from him about Malmö's experiences in becoming a green harbor of hope, as this is actually a sentence taken from your mayor.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Nice to be here, and nice to see you all in this very important webinar, of course. And Malmö has been a harbor of hope during many conflicts. For example, the Balkan wars and the wars in Syria. Today, over 180 different nationalities actually live here side by side. Our city has a long history of welcoming people who seek a life of peace and freedom, where the city has played a central role together with civil society. And now we are once again faced with a war that forces people to flee. People from Ukraine flee Putin's cold-blooded invasion, which has caused an enormous amount of human suffering. Our previous experiences serve us well, and Malmö is ready to yet again receive and welcome those who are seeking refuge here. But we also need to be humbled regarding the challenges that arise when many arrive within a short period of time. Society needs to quickly make space in different ways for these people through housing, schools, and healthcare. If those who have fled here will need to stay for a longer period of time, then they also need to be given the opportunity to work. For some, it is easy to find a job, but for many, there is a need for support in that process, of course. There are not only armed conflicts around the world, they can lead to increased number of people who seek to come people who seek to come to Malmö. The climate crisis consequences are already visible in many countries, and much points to the fact that many more countries will be affected. According to estimates made by the World Bank, about 143 million people will be displaced from their homes by 2050 due to climate change. Food shortage as a result of extreme drought and flooding, which causes big areas to become uninhabitable, as well as armed conflicts due to lack of raw materials, are just some examples of factors which will force people to flee their homes. At the same time, there are reasons to look at the climate crisis and the current situation in the world with a dose of worry. There is also room for hopefulness, of course. In the wake of the climate crisis, new industries and sectors emerge. Here, there are major opportunities for new jobs, new ways of working, both in Malmö, but also in the rest of Sweden. And the climate crisis also causes changes locally. Malmö is a city in the midst of constant change, which provides us with opportunities to this work. It's about everything from how we enable sustainable travel within the city and how we build apartments with as little climate impact as possible to how we can help organizations and civil society with working in an environmentally conscious way. At the same time, as ecological sustainability is central in building of the future Malmö, we also have to keep in mind financial and social sustainability. Malmö has to be a city that anyone can afford to live and be in, where everyone gets the opportunity to be part of something, regardless of whether it's in school, at work, or in an organization. And politics needs to ensure this. The city also works with urban development and has reached great success. And today Malmö is seen as one of the world's most sustainable cities. Around 2050, we are expected to be a city with 500,000 inhabitants. We need to continue to grow in a smart and sustainable way. We need to ensure that there are enough green spaces in our city. We need to do it in a way so that you can move fast on a bike or through public transport. And at the same time, we need to grow in a way where we do not use up lots of farmlands. But perhaps most importantly, we need to do this in a way which enables Malmö to continue to be a place where people with different backgrounds and with different types of income can actually live in our city. Even if we have seen the segregation was decreasing before the pandemics, there are still clear differences between the different parts of the city, which opportunities children have who grow up in different neighborhoods. We see a difference in health and life conditions. The different type of crisis our society has gone through in the last few years with the refugee crisis and the corona pandemic has made it clear that we need to build cities and societies which are greener, stronger, and more equal than before. In order to succeed, it is necessary that we mobilize all of our society. No part can make it its own. Cooperation between the city and civil society is something which is special for Malmö. We have for a long time had good collaborations with different organizations and other civil society actors. We also have continuous dialogue with them surrounding cooperation and how it can be further strengthened. Together with civil society and organizations, we find new sustainable ways towards work and inclusion. For example, I would like to mention today I was at Diligence, where they conduct sustainable urban cultivation. They receive people for work training and provide them with a path to work, and at the same time, there is a focus on a sustainable future. Our vision about Malmö of the future is about making sure that we can grow sustainable and all of Malmö, as well as more of our inhabitants, can take part of the success our city is seeing. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Sedat Ari, for your inspiring words and insights and visions from the city of Malmö. I really appreciated your strong call for action for cities, both in terms of responding to the ongoing war in Ukraine and the climate crisis, and responding to the different crises in a way that they are sustainable environmentally, socially, economically. This is something we fully agree on. So this, your speech will give us a great foundation to soon start the discussion with our two other speakers as well. So I will first introduce them to you, and they will both give a short intervention from presenting their perspective and experiences in this topic. And after that, we will move to a panel discussion with more in-depth questions. So first we would have Lena Wetterskog also from Malmö. Lena has had an assignment as the director of Skåne Stadsmission since autumn 2019. And before that, she has worked for many years as a head of public sector, mostly with the focus on policy issues, organizational development, and leadership. And she and her organization bring in the valuable perspective of a civil society organization. And then after Lena, we also have Joanna Balzema. She's the councillor in Cascais municipality, where she's responsible for environmental, climate action and participatory policies. She's also a member of the Urban Development Committee of the United Nations Commission for Europe. And she has worked at the permanent representation of Portugal to the EU, where she was responsible for negotiating EU legislative proposals related to environmental, climate, and energy legislation. And in addition, she has also been an advisor at the Ministry of Environment and she was the coordinator at the Agenda 21 program, the municipality of Cascais, and she has worked at the Vale of White Horse District Council in the UK, where she implemented the energy poverty strategy. So with Joanna's perspective from Cascais, Portugal, and beyond, we can expand the discussion beyond the Swedish experience and see maybe some of the differences, but surely also find some similarities and synergies. But without further ado, I would like to hand my virtual microphone to Lena first. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Joji. First, I must say I love Malmö. I've lived and worked here since 1986, and I've seen how the city developed through the years, from a grey concrete city to a colorful city of the future, a city with forward-thinking spirit and successful environmental work. A city of diversity and many ideas for a sustainable society. And all this makes me very proud and happy. But Malmö is also a city full of challenges, a city where many people are unemployed and there is a lack of affordable housing, a city where there is big differences in the children's upbringing conditions, a city where segregation and polarization has increased. And all this makes me sad and worried. That is why I now work in the Skåne Stadsmission, a city mission, 1 of 10 in Sweden. And I have chosen 3 topics for you because the city mission, we are making a lot of different operations. But a city mission is an NGO which provides support to people living in exclusion. And in this region, Skåne, we are operating in 3 cities. Malmö is one of them. I have about 120 co-workers and just over 60, 70 volunteers coming in almost every day. We're open every day, all year round, and we perform social work without being an authority. And we meet children, young people, adults, elderly. We meet people living in poverty, homelessness, with substance abuse, mental illness, and people who often live in loneliness. And we have seen the loneliness increasing through the pandemic. We help people with urgent basic needs, such as clothing, food, healthcare, social counseling, and contact with authorities, and so on. And we also work with opinion formation to tell the world around us about the people behind the statistic, because behind every number in our statistic, there is a living people. Living human being. And then just now we are investing in work training, work integration, so that more Malmö residents can get a job. And it's a very need if you're talking about a sustainable city and so on. So with us, you can practice on both simple and very difficult tasks in a safe and inclusive environment. And the city mission, we have a very large ecosystem where we receive and donate clothes, gadgets, and food. And every week we receive several tons of food waste. And this can be, for example, overproductions. It could be short dates or incorrectly goods. And we have just now in October started a social food store where we have had Sedat as a visitor. And this food store is for people with a low income. And it's called Matmissionen. It's a food mission. And we also distribute food bags to people that are poor families. So in a way, we are acting to the SDGs spot on every day, all year around. And just now we have focused on a living room. We had a great experience of meeting refugees. We have done that for several years. And for a couple of weeks ago, we quickly adjusted to be able to provide support to Ukrainian families. And now we have a support center in the middle of Malmö. We call it a living room, where you can meet other families, talking your languages, and the children can play, the adults can get community guidance, and you can get clothes, toys, and food. And we are being there as a compassion, my compassion co-workers. Yes, I think I will stop there because that's a little bit what we're doing in the City Mission. And every day we are meeting migrants from different countries.
Thank you so much, Lena. Like I really like how you highlighted that you are working with people behind the numbers, and this is very much important for us to understand that the diversity of situation when we talk about migrants, for example. Now we are talking about Ukrainians, but also we're talking about migrants beyond this situation, and also that migrants is not a homogeneous group that we're talking about here, and Malmö has a long history in that. Thank you. I look forward for a deeper discussion with you in the panel section, but for now, I'll pass the word to Joanna.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. This is Cascais behind me, or a part of it. We are about 20 minutes from Lisbon, the capital. We've got 210,000 inhabitants, a very long coastline and a natural park, and a few challenges with asymmetry. So this is the coastal side of the municipality, but inland, there are a few asymmetries and vulnerable spots. And these are a few of the everyday challenges we deal with. And I used to be very proud and impressed because Cascais has the national record for the most diversity of nationalities. There's 130 nationalities in Cascais, but now I heard Mayor Sadat speak about 180 in Malmö. So yeah, that really puts everything into perspective. Nevertheless, since ever, we've always been a sort of port of harbor for different cultures, at times of peace or at times of unrest. So after the Second World War, for example, we were a port of harbor for many different kinds of families and also for spies. And during the Portuguese colonial war as well. And I will dive right into what we are doing currently regarding the Ukrainian war. And we are reacting on two fronts. One of them is humanitarian aid. And then the second one is receiving refugees. So humanitarian aid is what we send to Ukraine, be it physically in Ukraine or to refugee camps outside Ukraine. And through donations and the work of hundreds of volunteers helping us with all the sorting and screening of the donations, we've sent 7 trucks of 22 tons of goods to Poland, Romania, and we've liaised with NGOs on the ground and also with cities. One ICLEI city actually has already been the recipient of one of these trucks, Alba Iulia in Romania, and then also the Romanian Association of Municipalities. And then there's a couple more of ICLEI colleagues with who we've liaised, but we haven't been able to correspond yet to their needs, which leads me to some of the challenges that I would like just to transparently put forth. One is how to do the due diligence. So when dealing with, not with cities, but with NGOs, I have to ensure that these NGOs are solid, credible, and they will really take care of the goods that our people have donated and take them to the right places. Another challenge is matching the needs with the offer. Because, for example, initially there was a lot of need for clothing, and now NGOs and cities tell us no more clothing, no more clothing. Yeah, I see Lena nodding her head. So food and hygiene goods and medical goods, and these are more difficult to get. And also there's the donation fatigue that we feel here. And this is why we have had to keep a few of our ICLEI partners on hold until we managed to get this new boost. It requires a lot of creativity. So tomorrow, Thursday, we are actually sending out 3 more trucks, but these are special ones. This is about creativity, and we've liaised with pharmaceuticals and doctors associations. And so these are 3 trucks, 22 tons each, full of medical equipment, and 1 truck full of vehicles, including ambulances. So we realized that if we focus on a specific theme, it is still possible to sort of mobilize and get more donations going. And now I'll briefly speak about the second side of our work regarding the Ukrainian crisis, which is how we welcome refugees. So refugees are arriving in Cascais 2 ways, well, 3, either by themselves or any other connections, or in evacuation missions that we organize by plane, or evacuation missions organized by other entities that then liaise with us. So then the refugees are welcome to our reception center. It's a very big building, and it's got common bathrooms and common bedrooms, and it's very big, and it's just a first stop. It's where we help them deal with the bureaucracy, and then whoever wants to stay on with us, or meaning that people don't have any other connections, so they stay on with us, we distribute them in 4 different accommodation centers, and here they have private bedrooms and bathrooms, etc. And the children are enrolled in Portuguese schools if the mothers so wish, or they receive a tablet or a computer so they can have the online schooling coming from Ukraine. And then the next step is really helping everyone fit in and feel at home. It takes, from our experience, 10 to 15 days. And I would just like to share, but taking also into consideration what Lena said about statistics not being just numbers, statistics being people, but I just like to share a dashboard that we've created that shows, hang on, it gives us just a broad perspective of who these refugees are. Actually, my mayor doesn't let me say refugees. We're supposed to say our invitees. So our guests. So, you know, our guests are, this is in Portuguese, but I'll just briefly say this. So in Cascais, we have 1,405 new guests, but here on the right-hand side, you can see that over 2,000 have actually been registered by the national authorities, which shows that not all of them are coming to Cascais, which is normal and fair enough. So they are in Cascais, but not under our care. And you can see that most of them are women, and then there's like 50% are minors, so under 18. And yeah, and 51 of them have come with pets. And then this is how after the first interviews, we can see that, you know, what percentage has university education. So quite a large percentage. And then we ask people how financially autosufficient they are, self-sufficient they are. And this little pie chart will show us that most of them do not claim they are not sufficiently self-sufficient, and this gives us also important indicators. And we ask them here, you know, what kind of needs they have, and most of them indicate food or housing or mobility, and then training. And then we ask them also about, you know, former professions, and here you see there's a lot of people coming from management background, or here it's a nursing background, for example. I don't want to bore you with all the details. Most of them come in good health also. So here is the number of people that have been received in the reception centers. And then here are the 4 different housing centers that we have. So the housing center occupation is 73%, which means we still have room for more. And here is the data about how citizens from Cascais are offering their houses. But actually here the occupation rate is not as high, it's only 13%. I'll stop sharing. And so, yeah, before questions, I'd just like to quickly say that a few of the challenges we've had is when we go and organize our own evacuation missions, the challenges are to really identify the refugees on the ground, and then the logistics and bureaucracy. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. And then the challenges once the refugees are here are related to just things like interpreters. We had to make a call for, and we asked citizens from Cascais who would volunteer, Ukrainian or Russian speaking, to help us with interpretation. We got 75 people volunteering, which is great. But then it means we were putting a lot of weight on them because they were volunteers, but we were asking for their help all the time because the refugees need translation all the time. So we had to find a solution for that. And then another challenge is food. Ukrainian diet is different to Portuguese diet, so it took us a while to adapt to that. And then expectations, just managing expectations, and many of the mothers that are staying with us don't want to register their children in Portuguese schools. They don't want to look for a job yet, because in their minds this means that they are just accepting that the war will be ongoing. And this is not a majority, this is a minority, but it's all about managing expectations. And then the last challenge is really adapting our organization. Maybe Malmö is more used to this. There was a huge influx, and we just had to, again, be creative, and I can go into details on that later. I was asked to bridge this topic with environmental sustainability issues, which is one of my portfolios as well. And I know we can discuss this now in the next section, but I would just like to say that here the biggest challenge is when there is a crisis like COVID, and now like this one, and the whole organization is mobilizing in that direction. The challenge here is not to forget the business as usual. And by business as usual, I don't mean maintenance as usual, because of course green spaces will be continued to be cared for and waste will continue to be collected. But I mean the business as usual that takes us that 1 or 2 steps further, and how to keep innovation going whilst dealing with the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and also presenting the important work in organizing the aid. And I'm very happy also to hear that you have found partners in organizing the city aid, collaborating with other ICLEI members. And finally, thank you for being very open about the challenges. I'm very sure that many cities and other local actors are also dealing with the same questions. So maybe this is something we can also discuss with Lena and Sedat in the panel discussion later. You got some good foundational questions there. But Matthew, do you want to take over to get the panel started?
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you very much to all 3 of you, to Sedat, to Lena, and to Joanna, for these really good insights. And I think you've really brought home the point that cities are on the front lines of all these issues that we are facing, whether we're talking about the war in Ukraine right now, and kind of the refugee situation linked to that, whether we're talking about climate change and its impacts. The cities are just continuously at the center of this, and are also microcosms of the world. I mean, I was absolutely amazed by the number of nationalities that you have in Malmö. I knew Malmö was diverse, but not to that point. So I think, thinking about all this, I wanted to ask our 2 city representatives, Sedat and Joanna, kind of how you understand the role of cities in not just helping to address urgent questions like migration, but then how do you try to integrate this work together with what you're doing in terms of sustainable cities, whether it's green urban greenery or other measures that you're putting in place? How can you try to build this bridge between these 2 areas, and to make sure that the green city that you put in place is one that's welcoming for all, and that also then is one that enables them to benefit from this kind of sustainable environment. So I think I'll give the word to Siddharth first and then to Joanna.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, it's a complex question, and maybe it's not an easy answer also, but being responsible for the labor market questions in terms of sustainability, social sustainability, I think from the lessons we've learned from the refugee crisis in 2015-16 with people coming from Syria, it has been really important for us to actually work with the labor market questions to make sure that people in a fast and early stage can actually get activity, so they in a long perspective can get own income, because if they don't get an own income, they don't get the possibility to get an own housing either. So in the long term we will have a poverty which is not good at all. And in a second perspective is thinking about the infrastructure, because taking such a big amount of refugees or guests, as they say in Cascais, to our city, it also gives us a huge challenge on how we build our city, because very often our cities from the 60s, 70s are built for cars. They are usually not built for human beings. So we have a challenge in thinking about how do we now, as a growing city, as a city that is planning to be a city of 500,000 in 2050, how do we build infrastructure with roads for bikes? How do we think about the transport questions within our city and the greenery? Because the lesser of space you have, sometimes we have a tendency to maybe take up the green spaces in the city, and it's important is to keep having the green spaces and still being able to grow. So this is a huge challenge for the city of Malmö, of course, but and a different challenge that I mentioned is the housing challenge, because we have a huge problem in the whole of our country, not in Malmö also, because the population is growing, but it is not being built enough of housing for the people of Sweden. So how we do it, how do we do it in an environmentally good way, and at the same time in a so the cost doesn't fly away, because if you just keep building expensive apartments, people don't have the wages to pay their rents or get an apartment. So these are the challenges that we are trying to work with in the city of Malmö, of course, in the short term, but also in the long term.
Thank you very much for that. And it's true that this reconciling between providing the minimum and including good housing, social services, and so on, while at the same time doing so within the plan's boundaries is really one of the biggest challenges that we face, and it's definitely not easy. So it's very encouraging to hear that Malmö is really trying to tackle this question and move forward with it. Joanna, curious to hear Cascais' perspective.
Well, I'll just start with a statistic, but this is not about people this time. It's about SDGs and the 169 targets. And this is a statistic actually coming from the European Commission that says that 2/3 of those targets will not be attained without the contribution of cities, of local authorities. So I think this says a lot, because I see cities as sort of the battlegrounds where these combats for sustainability will be won or lost. Cities have that kind of vital role, and this statistic really demonstrates it, and it demonstrates it in all breadth, not just environmentally, in the green way, but also socially, governance-wise, and economically wise. And yes, I agree. Cities, green cities are more welcoming, and they have to be, and we work on that because we want them to be welcoming for the people that are from here and for the guests. And I've noticed that how the nature has become a factor of connection. And now, going back to our guests, the Ukrainian guests, many of them had never seen the sea. And this was a tremendous experience, obviously for them, but also for the people that were accompanying them. And just for us that we were born here, and we call inland Cascais a piece of land that is 5 kilometers from the ocean. And this has been really interesting, something so simple. And also the fact that many of these families are convening in parks, because fortunately the weather is good, and this is where, it's a great place where you sort of lose some of the filters and the layers, and the kids play and the mothers chat. And also we are organizing activities for the guests, like taking the kids to football matches and stuff like that, or to the zoo. But also one activity that has worked out really well was kind of a volunteer work where they went to the national park, but also with locals. And in the national park, they helped us with nature conservation activities. And they said, this was an opportunity for them to give back in a way. And so all these little, details are not details, because they're about connection. But I also, I want to echo what Mayor Sadat said about infrastructure, and this challenge of when we're running, because there's an emergency, we tend to override environmental factors. And yeah, I mean, in one of our housing facilities, we're using really inadequate heating because there was no time to do it properly, and we're using inefficient heating. I mean, the building is warm, but here, thermal comfort comes before energy efficiency, I guess. But because it was an emergency, and now gradually we have to get back to a place where strategically these issues matter, and the emergency context is no longer an excuse. Another example where I think this happens is regarding the Build Back Greener issue, and we are focusing in Cascais very hard on providing more new jobs, incentivizing more new green jobs. But here we are just desperately seeking for jobs for the refugees, and we don't care if they're green or not anymore. We just want to help them have, again, this is about dignity. So a job, whether it's green or not, is a job. And then after, later we will deal with the green side of it. But it's hugely challenging, and to keep the business as usual strategic side of our work in balance with the more, running, rushing, emergency crisis side of this context.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And it's true that this is really a increased challenge that we're facing working on sustainable cities, where sometimes when there's an emergency, all the good plans and the good work that's being done is put on pause, and it's a real challenge to carry on with it. We've also been having conversations with our Polish members, who are obviously really on the front lines of helping I guess the Ukrainian guests that they have, but more and more we're finding that over time they're learning how to do their green work together with their social and welcoming work, and I think that's really encouraging. And I also want to thank you for bringing up nature as a place of connection, and this is also something we see in the very green city of Freiburg, where we are based, where I think just even yesterday my 2-year-old son was playing in the park with some Ukrainian children, and they seemed quite happy about the park, and I think it helps them to feel also more welcome, more grounded, and safer as well. So thank you very much. I'll pass over to my colleague Yui for the next question.
Yes, so next we would like to go more in depth about these key challenges that actually Joanna already showed a little bit from the city's perspective, what kind of challenges they're facing in terms of this topic, but especially in terms of this the collaboration between cities and NGOs. And since we have Lena here as well, I would want to hear from your side, and then of course Sadat and Joanna can follow as well in terms of these challenges in the collaboration around this topic?
Well, I will gladly follow your thesis, Joanna, about the migrants or the guests from Ukraine and other countries, of course, because we all know that migrants often go to cities, big cities, to find job, housing, and the future, although it's just a short kind of future level you got on. And we also know that UN says that cities have a major responsibility to turn the SDGs into reality on a local level. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm more and more sure that good integration requires innovative and brave cities, and of course, citizens with compassion. And if we talk about citizens, I know that Malmö and a lot of other cities in Sweden have huge amounts of citizens with compassion. And I also know that the city of Malmö have experts in all these policy areas and resources to make a difference. But sometimes I miss the courage from the municipalities to work in partnership with NGOs. And for me, that's a very big challenge because we live on fundraising, which means that we from day to day, week to week, month to month, have an unsafe situation. And it's hard to make a long time planning. And in the same time, I know that the city missions and other NGOs, of course, we can very quickly change our operations, but we need financial support. And I also need that every effort that the city mission makes creates an added value, both for the individual and the society. And then I mean everything we do. So just now I can see that we have people who are falling through the social safety net. We have gaps in our welfare system in Sweden, and we need a new way of collaboration, and the kind of collaboration that is built on trust between the public sector, the private sector, and the idea-driven sector. And I think magic will happen if all these three different sectors will go into a new sector where we look at each other in an eye level and reach out our hands using our different knowledge about these issues, about migrants and sustainable society. So that's a lot of questions turning around in my head just now, because we all want to do a good work. We all want to build a sustainable society. And I also agree with you, Joanna, that it's not a nice question. It's not a nice number to know that 2/3 of the SDGs, we will not reach it. I'll stop there, so I give you the other.
Thank you, Lena. I think it's very important to point out, because we keep talking about, the volunteers have a very important role here, and the people with compassion, there is compassion, but we also need care, we also need resources to sustain this and to actually make this useful and put it into practice. And I was wondering whether Sedat or Joanna have something to follow in this call.
Joanna, do you want to say it first, or?
No, go ahead.
No, I was actually thinking when it comes to challenges, I mentioned a lot of them in my first answer. And in the first step right now, in the acute stage, we need to work to make sure that the people coming to our city actually have good housing, of course. And it has been a challenge because this has been a responsibility of the state, but we as a municipality has gone in and taken a responsibility helping the state with this challenge. But in the long term, it's once again, if people will stay in our country, we need to integrate them into the labor market in a fast way and validate their educations, make sure that they can actually be a positive effect, give a positive effect to our society, instead of just not using that huge resource that has come to our cities. And once again, in the long term, the housing problem is a huge challenge, not for only Malmö, but whole of Sweden. We can see that this is a huge challenge, and we are asking the national politicians to actually start talking about this thing as a national problem, not as a Malmö problem or Gothenburg or Stockholm problem. This is a huge problem for the whole society, not only for the migrants, but also for the young people. They want to start a new life. So this is a huge challenge that we will be working with, and we have some ideas that we will be working with in the city. But once again, the state and the national politics needs to take great actions within these areas. Thank you.
I really agree with you, and this is the case in Portugal as well, especially in big cities where housing has just become unaffordable. And I'm not just talking about social housing. I'm talking about young kids, like you said, not being able to afford a house with their first job, and other such like situations. So if this is the case already, I worry about the challenge ahead regarding the refugees, and our goal is really to integrate them from A to Z. It's so it's challenging to bring them over, but I would say that's even the easiest part of the equation when you consider the whole A to Z. And so what happens, because living in an accommodation center forever is not an option, definitely. And so how to integrate labor market, how to integrate into housing, when housing is so difficult, also for the locals, and it's structural. It's a structural issue, and gentrification is happening in Cascais and Lisbon and other major cities. I would also like to touch on the challenge that happens for organizations when there is a crisis. So we felt this over COVID. There were lessons learned, and we felt it now, and we are still struggling a bit. I get the feeling that everybody rushes to help, and then our functions are not sufficiently well allocated or clearly allocated. As counselors sometimes, and then our teams are also confused, and teams that were normally dealing with other issues suddenly have to, it's a huge learning curve. It's a huge learning curve, and not letting go of the business as usual is also challenging, but interesting. I just feel that as an organization we should be doing more introspection, regarding how we can be best prepared for future crises, or even how we can, better organize for this situation. So this is like I'm self-criticizing my organization and myself. Just one more thought. I think, like I mentioned before, local authorities are great governance units, and I do believe that they will help to attain the 2/3 of SDG targets that need to be attained, because they are more agile than central government. I'm not saying that central government is not important, of course it is, but we are extremely agile, and we are not as limited or ridden by bureaucracy and ideology as central government sometimes is, when a reaction is quickly needed or prevention is quickly needed. But my thought is whether smaller units, so smaller cities or smaller units within the bigger cities, are more effective, efficient in situations like this, where you really need the closeness, the proximity of knowing about the processes and the people, and feeling the pulse at all times, than larger units. So whether smaller cities or medium-sized cities are more efficient at dealing with crisis.
Thank you, Joanna. And I feel like my takeaway from these last answers about the challenges, first of all, it's not only about like a problem for one city in Sweden or a couple cities in Sweden or just Sweden. It's across Europe, something that is shared across across European countries as well, and also that there is not a lack of will of collaborating, but there might be these structural problems when it comes to bigger cities especially, but also different organization structures. And since I'm very much aware that we're running out of time, I also want to take this one question and answer, that question that came from the audience to City of Cascais and Malmö. How do you receive refugees from other nationalities that are not from Ukraine? Matthew, you have marked something that you want to continue? No, okay. So yes, so this is both City of Cascais and Malmö. If you can keep it very short, how do you receive the refugees other beyond just the Ukraine refugees?
Do you want to start, Joanna?
I'll go fast. Yeah. We have refugees, for example, from Afghanistan. The process was completely different because they were given to us or transferred to us by a central government agency, because there was not an emergency. So we were not, I mean, we don't have any competencies in dealing with refugees or evacuation missions, but so normally we are allocated refugees by central government, and we provide housing and a per diem and all sorts of benefits. This time it was different because the influx was huge, and we went on and grabbed competencies that were not ours. Yeah.
Yes, from our side in Sweden, we have been allocated from the central government a number every year. So we know approximately what kind of numbers we are receiving for the coming year, which gives us a little bit of time to actually make sure that we can find housing and give them support. Their first years in Malmö, of course. It's not easy. It was a huge influx during the Syria war, also 2015 and 16, but we tried to manage it. And I can say that we have learned a lot now for the Ukraine crisis in comparison with the 2015 and 2016 crisis.
Thank you for this examples beyond the Ukraine crisis. Matthew, will you take this? Did we have something, another question left?
We're actually very close to the end of our time, and I'm conscious that we're very lucky to have all of these speakers with us, and I don't want us to run over. So before closing the webinar, I just thought maybe we could do a lightning round, and each one of you could just share with us what you see then as your key takeaway from this conversation, and starting with Lena.
All right, I think to manage the situation with migration and to build a more sustainable society, I think it's about co-working together between the public sector, the private and the NGOs, and to have the courage to be innovative and brave together, using each other more than we do now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Okay. I'll take up where Lena left off, actually. I see a really strong connection between participatory democracy and collaborative democracy, which we are very much focused on our business as usual activities. For example, Cascais has the biggest participatory budget in Europe, for example. And we have a really, regarding collaborative democracy, we have many networks of entities working at different levels, from civil protection to social care. And when a crisis occurs, all this comes together very spontaneously. And it's really, I love to be able to confirm that, the work that is done beforehand is really rising to the surface when situations like this happen. And we felt that very strongly as, these bonds.
Thank you. And what I'm taking with me from this webinar is, of course, I already know what Lena Wetterskog and Skåne Stadsmission are doing, but I was really impressed with the work that Cascais is doing with helping refugees and connecting with other ICLEI cities. So thank you very much for sharing that information. And it's really inspiring, and really glad to hear that you're doing this huge and great job that you're doing. So thank you.
No, but we have so much to learn from you. So I'm going to ask for your contacts later.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the best result from any conversation between cities that we could have, also this kind of ongoing desire for learning and conversation. We're out of time, but I'd like to really thank everyone who joined us today, both our attendees and our panelists. I also heard a lot of great kind of insights. I think this pointing to the need for solidarity, collaboration, also democracy in many ways, to really build the cities and the future that we need together, even especially even with those who are become our unexpected guests through hardship and other issues, and that we then have a responsibility to provide them with the green spaces and all the best. And I think I'm a little bit jealous of those who get to now enjoy the great Portuguese food and weather and green spaces in Cascais. And then a lot of us will be in Malmö in May. And again, I'd like to remind everyone that ICLEI is hosting, together with the city of Malmö, the World Congress, or the Malmö Summit, from the 11th to the 13th of May. So there are a few spaces left, so feel free to register. We'd be very happy to see you there, and we'll be able to take forward a lot of these kinds of conversations. So thanks again to everyone. Thank you to my colleague Yui for helping to facilitate, and I look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you.